with Marxism being a prominent part of our cultural decline, I think it's a good idea that we go ahead and look towards a nation that has implemented all the way. And let's today look at China and how they have implemented Marxism through communism. Jonathan Fiala here today for Further Every Day. In the studio, we got nearly a full house with Mr. Charlie in the chair of theology.
Good to see you guys.
Glad to have you on, sir. Missed you.
I've missed you guys. Been busy, but it's good to be back.
Glad to have you there. Clint, chair of philosophy. How's it going?
Going good, going good.
Glad to have you there. Mr. Steve?
Doing good, man. Only one hat today.
Only one hat. No,
one hat today.
no tinfoil hats
Not
this
today.
time. Not this time. In the
But
chair of
now
culture.
I can't say that I'm not going.
Yeah,
Things
well.
just kind of come out.
It is Brother Steve we're talking about here. Okay, moving over to Josh. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good this fine afternoon. Or it's actually evening, this fine evening.
But glad to have you in the chair of economics.
Of course. Love the economics.
And you two will be sharing that chair of politics. I'll probably dance around a little bit in there too. We'll have some fun. But let's go ahead and get into some of the stories. It's an interesting thing to look at what's happening in China. And it's really interesting to look at how the global elites, I know that's been overused, but the people who are making billions of dollars, trillions of dollars even, and people don't realize how much money there is to be made in globalism, how they will overlook the plight of minorities who are being actively harmed. Not talking about racial reparations from 400 years ago. I'm talking about today. They are being, well, I won't get ahead of the story too much, but we're talking about genocide. And there's a well-kept secret on YouTube, except he's not well-kept. It's 1.87 million subscribers, China Uncensored. And I just want to play just a minute from his clip, and it's a 20-minute video. Link in the description. I highly recommend that you watch the whole thing. Yes. But I want to get everyone's reaction to this video because I think it is important to grab a snippet here. He's talking about how genocide is overlooked. The genocide of the Falun Gong is being overlooked by the UN because there's money to be made. So with that said, let's go ahead and watch this clip and we'll react as we watch.
Its suppliers use Uyghur slave labor, but with the genocide label, that becomes a little more difficult to get away with. And Apple was forced to cut off some of its Chinese suppliers. Not all of them, though. I mean, just because a few Chinese suppliers are fine using slave labor in a country committing genocide, that doesn't mean all Chinese suppliers are bad. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Don't let a few bad genocide eggs spoil the bunch.
He is funny.
Although instead of eggs, I should probably say a few bad apples. That expression has never been more perfect. The US, Canada, the UK, and even the EU imposed sanctions on Chinese officials over Xinjiang, as well as on many Chinese state-run companies. So, bad for business. But as much resistance as there's been toward labeling the persecution of Uyghurs a genocide, at least it's still something the media are talking about. But there's one genocide happening to this day that the Chinese Communist Party is all but getting away with, and practically nobody is covering it. I'll tell you more after the break.
So let's go ahead and go to, there's a different video that we're going to go ahead and pull up. And they actually get into it in depth, and they actually have some info from it. And I think it's interesting to see what happened in the 1990s, late 1990s. The Falun Gong were almost a protected class of sorts in China for many, many, many years. And we'll talk about what happened shortly. But for now, let's hear about what's happening today since 2005.
Admitted to harvesting organs from death row inmates, a practice it vowed to stop in 2015. Since then, China claims all transplant organs come from a large network of voluntary donors, but that claim has been refuted. On June 17th, the China Tribunal released another report where it confirmed that the CCP continues to harvest organs from prisoners of conscience, mainly from Falun Gong practitioners and Muslim Uyghurs, some of whom were reportedly still alive at the time of extraction. Data from the Chinese Ministry of Health show liver and kidney transplants began to rise in 1999, the same year the Falun Gong persecution started. In 2006, a human rights group conducted an investigation where they called several hospitals in China, posing as patients in need of urgent organ transplants. The recordings are chilling.
哎，是中国医科大学宋主任吗？
Hi, this is Ting Chang.
哎，我
Yes,
然后
speak,
他那个
please.
医生
His
跟他
doctor
讲，就
told
是
him
说
that the
这个肾源挺好
source of
的，
the
就是
kidney is
说
very
那个
good. Suppliers
他练
practice
功
Falun Gong.
练什么功？练法轮功，
What is
练
King
法轮
Gong
功，就是
Falun
练法轮
Gong?
功，身
Because
体都比
people
较
who
好嘛，
practice
练功的
Falun
行
Gong
啊
have good。health.
你要给他这么一个。
Of course, we have a similar situation here. We also have these so-called suppliers of bodies that are breathing or still have a heartbeat. We also have them. Of course, we might have some of this type. So far this year, we probably had more than 10 kidneys of this kind.
Human rights lawyers, Teresa brought the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners to the UN's attention. The reaction is disappointing, but unsurprising.
They just listened. They didn't have any action. And then they say these things, such things are too big, too large. They didn't deny our evidence and didn't deny the allegation. They just didn't take any action.
So, what does China have to say about all this? Have there been any changes?
No, there's not a change at all. The persecution policy still continues. In military or world nationwide, they still arrest Falun Gong practitioners from time to time, especially on a sensitive day. For example, they have a big international events in China. They fear Falun Gong practitioners go to protest or going out to clarify the truth to the foreigners or to international guests. So during some called big days, they are especially massively arrest Falun Gong practitioners.
So all of this started, let's talk about when this started. All of this started in the 90s when Falun Gong is a mixture of Taoism and Buddhism. And it's very at home in China. It's a very, very germane religion. But what's interesting is where this started was when they said, wait a minute, our book is exclusive. They have their own religious text. And the Chinese government came out and said, well, it's actually pseudoscience. Therefore, we are going to silence it. What does this sound like to those of you in the room?
Religious persecution.
I mean, by definition, right?
Yeah. That's and that is full on a hallmark trait of Marxism.
Yeah,
And suppression of speech,
absolutely.
where you're not allowed to talk about, like lady was talking about on International Days, when they have lots of people, lots of foreigners coming into their country. Big time for them to arrest Falun Gong followers, put them in prison. They don't want them out there. Not just like Charlie mentioned, freedom of religion problem, but suppression of free speech.
Correct. And what you see here is secular humanism at its finest. You cannot have secular humanism without stamping out the rights of those who say they hold to a truth. And it's not just Christianity, but I do think that Christianity and Judaism both have had a much more interesting ride on that train.
Yeah. Yep, I would agree.
But now we're seeing Uyghur Muslims and the Falun Gong being persecuted. And when we say persecuted, we mean their hearts are beating while their organs are being harvested. They are alive. They're being harvested alive.
One of the things that I wanted to bring out on the genocide front, or not the genocide front, but this issue, there's a difference between organ harvesting and organ donation. One is willful, a willful giving, and organ harvesting is a forceful taking.
Robbery.
So yeah, and so for people out there that really don't understand this issue very well, that's a major differentiator. In America, we believe in, by the way, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that there isn't some illegal harvesting going on in America.
Oh, absolutely, there is.
I'm not saying that at all. But you're seeing it, I'm going to say it's open in China, and it's not willful. It's a forceful taking. And you brought up an excellent point, while the heart's still beating.
95% of the over $1 billion industry of organ transplants in China, 95% is estimated were unwillingly. In other words, they were murdered for their organs. There's no beating around the bush about it. They were murdered for their organs. And the reason why is because we have devalued the human.
I'll take that a step further. I believe that's absolutely accurate. I believe it is an unbelievable money-making scheme.
Yes.
I mean, the money behind this is huge.
I agree. And you were on the podcast. I don't know if you had a chance to review this one when we talked about this, but the hypothetical of uterine transplants to transgender men, to male to female, is now becoming a real thing. And by the way, just give them some time. They're going to try to do it with male organs to female. Yeah. So you have the situation where you've got two troubled 15-year-olds, a boy and a girl, and it's not hard to imagine a doctor running from one room to say, oh, you're really a boy, to the girl, let me have your uterus so I can go and put it in this boy. And by the way, I'm going to go grab his penis. Sorry, guys. And I'm going to try to transplant it on you. Like, that is not far. That is not far from a reality. That is absolutely within 10 years, we could see that happening.
It's lunacy.
Well, guess, you know where the first transplant of that took place was over in that part. Where was it? Taiwan or China or someplace like that? India or something like that, I think.
I'd have to look it up.
I believe one of those countries.
Jamie, can you look that up?
The fact that you called
that was good. Good reaction.
So Rai, the producer guy, is going to look that up, where the first uterine transplant was attempted. He's going to look that up real quick while we're talking here, so he can do some research for us.
On private. No,
But yeah, absolutely. So I want to go to the chair of theology here, and I want to start to kind of break this down, because I see a few things going on with the Marxist revolution in the West, but you can really look to the East, look in China. And again, guys, it's not about the color of their skin. It's not about their blood. It's about bad ideas. Mm-hmm. You want to go to Germany? They had some bad ideas. They look like me. They had some bad ideas. They were white Jews, okay? And it's nothing against Jews. I'm just saying they looked like me. That's what I'm saying. The Chinese, they look different, but I'm saying that it's the bad idea. So I want to ask, what does the Bible say about genocide? And that's really what we're seeing with the Falun Gong.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, because when you talk about genocide, first of all, the Bible is a fairly violent book. I mean, it's got plenty of violence in it. And when you look at some of the commands that God has given, especially from 1 Samuel chapter 15, verses 2 and 3, this is what it says. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, I remember that which Amalek did to Israel, how he laid wait for him in the way when he came up from Egypt. Now go and smite Amalek, now listen to this, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, wait for it, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And if you're an unbeliever and you're listening to those two verses for the first time, you might be sitting there going, I'm not following a God like that. You should have some proper context behind that whole thing. And one of those is this. Why did God command something like that? Well, let me give you a little understanding here. children are not innocent. These are bad people. And you leave the children around, what's going to happen? So they're likely going to grow up as adherents to the evil that was there before. That's number one. And they would have naturally had the taste to avenge the parents.
Define bad people.
Oh, they're evil. They worship other than God. They get into all sorts of practices.
We're talking cannibalism.
Yep.
We're talking cannibalism. We're talking about infanticide. We're talking about all sorts of sexual deviancy that cause diseases, some of which, in theory, might have been responsible for wiping out some of those early Mesopotamian societies. You want to know why God took that seriously? STDs are not a joke.
Yep. That is the reason why God wanted them utterly destroyed. Now, you'll also note 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 20, Saul is supposed to kill King Agag and everyone else under his rule, including children and infants, and he didn't. What was the price of that? Well, it wasn't only several hundred years later, and there's an attempt by this man named Haman, who is wanting to wipe out the entire Jewish people. So when God looks at this, genocide, the way that we know it, is started by man. It's initiated by man. There should be no genocide outside of God saying, do it. But we trust God in what he's doing and what he's commanding. And I think that's a really important distinction to make. Genocide should not be man-started. And look, you talk about what's going on in China, look at just a small snippet of what happened with Hitler.
Yeah.
And it was not going to stop there. When you look at China and they're trying to wipe out the Uyghurs, it won't stop there. It'll go more.
And if you let them, they'll cross continents.
Yes.
They've done it before.
Yeah.
And again, it's not about race. You have to say that every single freaking time. Hitler did it.
Yes.
We're talking about Genghis Khan. These people, they will do it, and it's not people, it's the tyrants. It's not the blood, it's the tyrants.
Yeah, I would agree. Absolutely agree. This is it's a tough topic, but when you look at it from a biblical perspective, when you study your Bible, when God initiates it, it's not genocide. There's a reason behind this to take care of the future.
So, and primarily what you see in the Bible is God is all about redeeming lines.
Amen.
He's all about redeeming lines. The only time, and people will say genocide, this and that, God's genocidal. No. He does protect nations from falling in the future from bad lines, from people who are committing, we're talking cannibalism, sexual immorality, and infanticide. And what you see there is not sustainable for a world. So let's pull that one off the table. When people are doing that, so God's not for genocide, ever. He's for judgment and for stopping these people, just so that people understand what Mr. Charlie was saying. Yeah. God's never for genocide. He did say, wipe these people out. It happens to be that they're a race, but every single person in that nation is beholden to cannibalism, sexual immorality, and infanticide. Like, you can't let that, you got to stamp it. It's not about the blood. Again, with God, it was never about the blood.
Amen.
It was about the ideas and the culture.
There's a huge principle at play. What is God about all the way from Genesis through be fruitful and multiply, be fruitful and multiply, be fruitful and multiply? He's about life. When you talk about the genocide, when you talk about the infanticide, when you talk about the cannibalism, what is that? It's the opposite. It's the total 180 of what God wants. So you're really in a situation where you can clearly see why God would instruct something like that, because it's just totally against his nature.
And so, again, God was never And that's something that people really miss when they read the Old Testament. God was never for genocide. So we've got that down. We also see something else, we see something else interesting in China. Sneeze is gone.
I was going to say,
sneeze is gone.
The sneeze is
I was about to mute myself out. The sneeze is gone. Sorry. We see something else in China right now with abortion. And again, to note, to kind of hint at what we just talked about, what does the Bible say about abortion?
Boy, here we go again. It's about life. Choose life. From a biblical perspective, here's a couple of verses that I think would be really helpful for people to think about. Jeremiah 1:5, before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations. It's a great verse. But if you want something to really hit the ball out of the park, Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 to 25. If men strive and hurt a woman with child so that her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, he shall surely be punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Don't tell me that God's not for life. Don't tell me that he's okay with abortion.
It almost sounds like the people who use that verse for abortion, for pro-abortion, the liberal Christian, it's almost like they didn't read the
part of their Bible.
That last little bit of the verse.
Interesting that they don't,
they don't finish
read certain parts and just kind of leave out certain parts of the Bible on purpose.
But I think it goes to the heart of us as humans. At our core, we don't want to be held accountable for what we want to do. If it feels good, do it. That kind of thing. And we don't want to be held accountable for that. Because why? Because that kind of interferes with our good times. Right. and it's just a cringy, I don't want to answer to God.
And that's really at the heart of what we're discussing today with Marxism and communism.
Yes.
And that's the issue. And again, you want to look at the issue of genocide in the Bible. Some people say, again, God was against the people who were basing their murder on superficial external characteristics of other nations. And again, of all of this immorality with infanticide. People don't realize when they read the Bible, they read about Molech, they read about Ashtoreth. Those are gods of sex and gods of death. And they were actively participating in that stuff. What we see is this reversion. Well, in China, I'm not sure if it's a reversion or if it's just a change in course, but you see in the West, we're trying to adopt these reversions with abortion, where it's not progressive. It is a step backwards to give the parent the right over life and death for the child. That's what you see in the Bible. And Dennis Prager really, really eloquently spoke this. He said, you will find almost zero, if not zero, cases where a child was killed by the parents in Jewish law and Jewish history. And the reason why God put that in the Torah was they had to take the child to the gate. And when the Bible says they take a child to the gate, that means they had to take him before the judge. And the judge could say, whoa, you're crazy. No, you can't kill that kid. Because before that, you guys ever hear the phrase, I brought you into this world, I can take you out?
Yeah, I know that one quite well.
I bet you do.
That one been used on you there, bud?
A couple times.
Dan is over there saying, yep, me too.
Yeah.
Hashtag me too. Me too? No, okay, anyway. But all that to say, we're not going in a good direction there. And I want to move over a little bit to the chair philosophy. But before I do, we did bring up the idea of uterine implants. The first successful one, Ryan, was when? He's telling me 2,000 in Saudi Arabia, actually.
Saudi Arabia.
Whoa.
In Saudi Arabia. Did not know that.
Now that's interesting.
Because,
Wow.
so the recipient was a 26-year-old who had suffered a postpartum hemorrhage after a cesarean section resulting in a hysterectomy. The donor was a woman in her 40s who was having a hysterectomy and agreed to donate her effectively functional uterus.
Wow.
So
To a
that's
male?
wild.
Wow, that
No. But what's really surprising about that is that it happened in a Muslim country.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
It's like,
I
why
wouldn't
wouldn't he
have
throw
expected
throw her away? There's plenty more 26-year-olds.
Yeah.
There might have actually been something good there. There might have been some love there, because that's not usual. I mean,
no.
do
that's
you know how they
usually
treat
too
cars
bad.
over there?
Terribly.
They just,
Terribly.
oh, I'm sorry, we've used the spare. We're going to leave it on the side of the road. And by the way, if you take it, you'll get your hand cut off.
Right.
But they just dump the car.
Don't.
That's really interesting. Really
Yeah.
interesting.
So I want to move over to philosophy here, and I want to talk to you, Clint, for a moment. What effect does secular humanism or atheism have upon the value of the human being when you compare that to the Judeo-Christian principle of we are imago Deo, we are made in the image of God, versus secular humanism where you are simply stardust? You have to speak closer to the mic, bud.
Well, I don't believe the whole Stardust thing. I believe we're from monkeys. I think that gives me a little bit of better understanding.
Oh, no.
So
No.
you can clearly see the effects of viewing a human less than a human, right? So as a Christian, we view humans with life and that have souls and that they're cherished, right? Because God cherishes them, so therefore we cherish them. Not because he tells us, because it's important. Where they go is important to us, and it's sad to know that a lot of people are condemned to hell. And we're not going to be able to reach every single one of them. It's a sad thought, but we should find joy in the ones we do save, and the ones we do are able to plant the seeds. Because we I ain't saving anybody. I'll tell you that for a fact. I can't even save myself. Okay, I just plant the seed. Okay, little Jesus, little plant the seed, and he can water the rest. Right, that's our job, and I find this crucial in life, right? Because if we view someone with less value, it's a terrible thought, because then you no longer care for their life. You no longer care where they go at the end of the day, right? Because I grew up with my grandma, my mom, and my dad as giving people. I mean, my grandpa goes down to Mexico, literally to a cardboard town where their beds are out of tampons, and he gives them stuff. But they don't take handouts, okay? Mexican people don't take handouts. They're like, I'll give you 2 pesos for that, right? Which is that's less than 50 cents. That's less than 50 cents. But they don't care. They're willing to purchase whatever they have, whatever means to purchase, so they can get the little bit of pride they have left. They're still holding on that pride that they have. It's not a bad thing to have a little pride, okay? It's not a bad thing. I have pride in being a Christian, so therefore that's why I stand up for my belief. But the country has turned their back on those people, and now they just live off the trash the country leaves them. That's sad. But these people will take you in their house without a single mindset, and like, oh, you're hungry? I'll give you some of this. That might be their food for weeks, and they're willing to give it to you. Why? Because you're a human being.
And that comes down to culture, right? That comes down to having, and that's something that you see in the Latin community that is still generally holding strong, even if they're voting with the crazy nut jobs in DC.
Oh, Lord.
On the leftist side, they're somehow detached from the way they actually live. The way they live is this godly value and this ethic. Is abortion? You can ask them, if they're living in America and they're voting Democrat, you can ask these Catholic Latinos, do you believe in abortion? And they'll say, well, no. Do you believe that, we should have reparations for slavery? Why? I wasn't here. I didn't even do it.
Exactly.
I'm a Latino. But then, and a lot of the white people here haven't done it. They'll give you a common sense answer, but then you ask them, why are you doing it? It's because it's being nice, right? But when you go to a culture like China that has had generation after generation of people who have been brainwashed into this idea that really people are just evolved monkeys. You know, they're just evolved monkeys. It now makes sense to drown your daughter in the bathtub when she's 2 hours old.
Because who cares? They no longer have life in them. There's no longer, I can put a value on Charlie's life with a dollar sign. That's basically what it comes down to. I can put your life into a dollar sign, and that's it. If I can make money off of you and make my life better, why not take it?
That right there goes to the epitome of how China views their people. They view them as money, not as humans. And let me also say this. I mean, we're speaking on the issue of China, but America is heading down that path very quickly.
Well, that's exactly where we're going with this.
It's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So once you've seen secular humanism seep in to our philosophy, where we've abandoned God, instead we've put ourselves on the throne, and you don't have to raise yourself up to put yourself on the throne. You can just take away the standard bearer, get rid of God, and then all of a sudden the standards are very low.
Mm-hmm.
That now means it's very easy to fit within those standards, and it's just better than the next guy. So now that we have taken God out of the equation, and we no longer have a proper philosophy about the value, the innate intrinsic value of each human as an image bearer of God, culturally, chair of culture, what starts to happen? What do we see happening in America as far as the value of human life? Do we see some trends like China? And if so, how does that look?
Well, as far as trends going, excuse me, we see the human life becoming in what a lot of people think of as devaluing, but as far as dollar value goes on the market, and on say like the medical field market, like they do in China, which like Charlie had mentioned that it does occur in the States, but it's just not as out in the open as it is in China. I mean, in China, okay, one of the little pieces that we have, which you probably have in the description, there's a section in there where they talk about having where typically you wait for an organ for a year, 2, 3, 4 years.
Yep.
You go over there, whether you come from another country or in that country, and it's like 3 months or less.
It's
you
still beating.
You got an organ, man, boom, just like that.
I guess I've looked up some statistics on that. 60 to 90,000 transplants every year. That was around 2016. That's roughly 200 per day. That's a lot of transplanting.
Yeah, and think about how many people had to die for that.
Yeah.
When you consider the fact that as much as 90% or even as high as 95% of those were unwilling donors in China.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a whole nother ball game. And I want to go, because we talked about this a little bit earlier, but we're starting to see this with the transgender issue, where people are now suing doctors because they're coming back and they're saying, you gave me 2 visits and you had me chop off my breasts and have a hysterectomy. You gave me 2 visits, and then you did $300,000 or whatever the heck it is, dollars worth of surgeries on me, and you didn't care.
They feel like they've been mutilated.
And
Well,
I'm not happy. I'm depressed. I don't like this.
Because
I want to retransition back
Yeah.
because I'm not I don't like this.
It's
I
like
don't
getting
the way I'm
high,
getting.
and I don't understand why they don't see it. It's almost always the case. Every time someone gets high, is because they want a relief of something, a relief of some sort, right? So when I wanted to get high, it was always a relief of the things I was doing wrong, and my conscience was telling me, "Hey, listen here, you're doing it wrong. You're gonna fall flat on your face, and it's gonna come out bad." And I don't want to hear that voice anymore, so I numbed it down with weed. You know what happened to me? The moment I was off of weed, man, I hit rock bottom, and I hit it hard. It like falling off a skyscraper, man. It hits you hard, and then you're just like, I don't want to do anything. I got to get another hit. Like it's just a recurring effect because you're just running away from the problem. You're just being a coward. That at the end of the day, it's just cowardness, right? You can't blame something on someone else because of your own cowardness to stand up and to admit that, for one, you're wrong, for two, that you're a nasty sinner, and for three, that God is God, no matter what disputes you want to put. I'm willing to talk to you, right? There's people always willing to talk to you, to be like, hey, why do you disagree with God? Let's get to the bottom issue, because there's always an underlying issue why you disagree with God.
Yes. But it reminds me of Proverbs 9, where the foolish woman says, stolen water is sweet, bread eaten in secret is pleasant.
Mm-hmm.
But little do those men know that the dead are buried in our house. And that's something that sin does. And I'm not saying this from a perspective of condemnation. I'm saying this from a perspective of personal experience. Like, just to echo what you were saying a moment ago, Clint, you think a way seems right to a man, but in that way, the end is death. That is something that we as Christians need to be warning people about. We need to be blaring the sirens. We need to be the watchman on the wall of Ezekiel 33:6. If we don't, we will be held as just as accountable as that watchman. So we need to be accountable in our culture. Moving over to the chair of politics, I'm gonna throw this out to the room, and I'm gonna kind of lead this, but I just want to throw this out there. What remedies do the people of China have? At this point, what remedies do they have? What remedies do we have in America, and what do we see slipping away? And how does this compare to a Romans 13:1-7 government?
I think we have far more remedies in America than anywhere else in the world.
Agreed.
I'll say that.
Agreed.
And if we're not careful, we will be like those other countries, and there will be no remedies. When it's funny you're asking that question, because I was actually thinking about that earlier today. What could the people of China really do? And I'm not sure. I think Tiananmen Square was one of the closest things to see to a culture standing up to its government like that, and nearly it put China in a really bad light, a really bad light. And I think Tiananmen Square kind of still lives on, especially in the government of China.
Well, they're scared to death of it.
Yes.
Whenever someone mentions it, and by the way, link in the description below to both of those YouTube channels. I don't remember the one of them off the top of my name, but both of them are there. Great. China Uncensored. He was linking to was it Uncle what's the Chinese cook? Uncle
Roger.
Uncle Roger. Uncle Roger got in hot water with the Chi-Com government because he had another person on his show who happened to have made Tiananmen Square references in another video. Not even linked, not even on Uncle Roger's video. And Uncle Roger had to pull that, and he had to do the licking of the boot to regain favor with the Chinese Communist Party.
That shows you how much the Chinese government fears that kind of thing.
Exactly. And so that's one side of it. And then the other side that I really want to get y'all's take on, and this is something that people bring up. A lot of folks like John MacArthur, God bless him, at least he used to say that the Americans should never have revolted against the British. I'm going to leave that argument off to the side for this conversation. I believe what happened was just and right. I'm going to leave that conversation to the side. In Romans 13, 1 through 7, I want to talk about what should the Chinese Christian do under this versus what should the American Christian do in regards to the same types of policies. I want to get y'all's take on that. And what I mean by that is Romans 13, 1 through 7, for a ruler is not a tyrant for those over whom he rules, but he is not given the sword in vain. He bears it in God's name, is the rough paraphrase of those 7 verses. So we'll start off with the Chinese.
Tyrant, they don't deserve what they have, being a tyrant, and it's up for the people to do something about it. Now, in China, there's probably a problem with that and rising up. One of them is people are so afraid of becoming prisoners of conscience, because what happens to prisoners of conscience? You go into prison, chances are you're going to get the death sentence. And if you get the death sentence, just because you're a prisoner of conscience, because you're a problem with the state, okay, you're a threat to the state, that makes you someone that needs the death sentence in their mind.
Or you're a prime candidate for your organs to be harvested.
Exactly. And if you get the death sentence, you are someone that they're going to take your organs from, and chances are, you're going to be killed within no time because they need your organs.
Yep. And so this is actually my take, and I'm going to have a kind of a weird take here, and some people in this room might disagree with me. I don't think that in most cases, violent dissidence is at all permissible or acceptable in China for a Christian. And I want to put a caveat, unless it's to save life. Unless it's to save life. And there's a reason I'm saying that. When it comes to the Hong Kong protests, dude, if I was I would hope that I would have the courage to be out there protesting. I would hope that I would have the courage to be out there protesting. But assassinating government officials or murdering, that is not in the Christian's wheelhouse. That is not something that we are called to do.
Because then if we raise ourselves to monsters, who's better then? Because if I'm willing to kill someone that's done me wrong, what makes me different than them?
To an extent, that's what I'm saying. And it's an issue of, are you acting for God's glory, or are you acting for your preservation? And those two are often similar, like Steve just said. There is a value in staying alive, in staying free, so that you can share the gospel another day. Because you got to remember that you're not of this world.
See, this question to me is most apropos for us as Americans right now.
Yep.
It's huge, because we are at a precipice of a pivot in this nation. We can go the path that takes us closer to the Marxist kind of thing, or are we going to be in a position where we might have to make that decision that you're talking about? And I think for Christians, and I would encourage Christians to read Romans 13, 1 through 7. And you can see the difficulty of a Christian answering the question that you've put forth. I could actually go ahead and I'm not going to lean one way or the other on this particular podcast, because I've never come up with a comfortable answer.
You've thought about it, but you've never arrived at a full...
That is correct. And let me just also say this, John Arthur. I have total respect for what you're saying. Absolutely total respect, and will not say that I disagree with it at the moment.
Here's the caveat. You haven't let me get to the caveat yet.
Okay.
I think in America, we're blessed with a very different government. And
Absolutely.
the reason why I say that this changes for Americans is that it is literally within our Constitution. It is within the Declaration of Independence. People say the Declaration of Independence does not have anything to do with the Constitution. That is wrong. The
Completely
Constitution literally references the Articles of Confederation. Didn't know that, did you? It references the Declaration of Independence in one other document. But that said, you've got 4 documents there, and the ones of note are Declaration and Constitution. In our governmental structure, it is our duty, our right to do whatever it takes as Americans. I'm gonna create an interesting line here. This is what I think, and I'd like to get y'all's opinion. As Americans, it is our duty and right, by whatever means necessary, to maintain the state of the union as a free union. As Christians, there are some limitations on that. However, if we allow this nation and the freedom that it holds to go, I do believe that we will usher in the new times, not by our strength or power, but rather by our apathy, by our lack of capacity, by our pure, sluggish sloth.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that.
And so it's on us as Americans to try to push for liberty in Christ, not liberty for liberty's sake, because we saw what that did in France. Okay? Liberty under Christ was the interesting distinction of the American experiment. It's what made America work, because we saw what happened in France. And you had Edmund Burke and John Locke, and I know I've said this before, I'm sorry guys, but you have Edmund Burke, who's more focused on soil, blood, and flag. And that was the left-wing European Enlightenment. Edmund Burke had a lot of really good things to say, by the way. He was no dummy. But John Locke based it on not the value of man's intellect, but the value of God's image under God.
Big difference.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, just before you jump in there, Steve, the one thing that I was thinking about regarding, what kind of decision are you going to make? We live in a nation where abortion was overruled by the Supreme Court, which I believe was the right thing to do, and it left it to the states. And the thing is that a lot of people really almost came off the tracks with that, not realizing, or maybe they did, they just wanted as a quote unquote constitutional right to have an abortion. You still have the ability to fight within your own state to make that the case. And your question poses a lot of moments.
It takes thought.
It really does.
It takes some thought. And so I want to ask Mr. Steve, what were you up to there?
Oh, I was just going to say what you were talking about, John Arthur, was that, the thought of liberty for flag and soil is completely contradictory to what our reason on why our country was founded and what it was founded upon. And we used our Christian faith for founding our country, for our freedom, and to continue to have our freedom and liberty in this country.
The Plymouth Colony did.
Correct. And order for it to be maintained, it will be up to the Christians to continue to maintain that, being that it was founded by Christians and got it started that way, because you can see where the onslaught is coming from: secular humanism.
Indeed. So I want to go over to the chair of economics. Josh, you've been really quiet tonight.
Man, I know. That's not normal.
What are you thinking?
Not much. I'm just waiting to get here.
Just soaking in.
Just soaking it in.
Just soaking it in. Okay. So thank you for soaking it all in. Let's talk about it here. when we've devalued the human being, we've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but I really want to hear your thoughts on this. When we've devalued the human being, what happens to the work ethic, and what do we see in China happening with the lack of innovation, the lack of creativity? You go to China, you see they're very good at deconstructing things, but there's no one on earth with the sane mind who would say that China is the capital of innovation. They would say that it would either be a European nation or the U.S. One or the other. I think it's USA. What happens to the human mind and the human spirit, and what kind of government regulations do we see develop for that?
So before I get into all the other parts of that question, I want to approach the very first question that was posed, or the very first statement that was posed. After we have devalued the human being. So what does happen after we devalue the human being? I think what you'll see, and what we've seen historically, is that people groups become very monolithic. And that's the way that they're talked about, and that's the way that they are approached. Case in point, we've already mentioned it, 1940s Germany. Case in point, 1700s, 1800s America. Case in point, you go down the list. You see this, that whenever you devalue the human being, it typically gets away from it about being the individual and becomes something of a monolithic groups of people. And what happens in that system? Well, the unfortunate truth is, whoever holds the power in that structure, or whoever gains the power in that structure, will start beating down the other groups in the structure.
Correct.
And I thought this was just such a funny question, because I was watching a video today, and it had nothing to do with this, but it was a video posted by Jubilee. It's one of those videos where it was like 6 black people versus 1 white person. Who's the white? But it's like it said, who is the white person? They're trying to figure out who's the white person.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the people who had participated in the video had posted a comment under the YouTube section, and I thought it was weird because he kept saying black people in this monolithic sense, but then he says in one of his statements, black people are not monolithic. And I said, well, that's a contradictory statement that you've just made, because you've just grouped all black people to be
A group.
And then you said they weren't monolithic.
So this has been on my mind, this idea of these monolithic groups and people acting in entities in that capacity. Getting to China, the ruling class in China, there is a great wealth disparity in China.
Yeah.
You go to other countries. I mean, Korea is a lot better, obviously, but
Yes.
There's still a pretty great wealth disparity in Korea, even, but less so. You go to, you can go anywhere really and look at it, but especially in China. I just want to keep it honed in on China, is that you see that disparity, and then what happens when the leading monolithic group says to the other group, if you disagree with us, we're going to take your organs.
Mm-hmm.
And if you disagree with us, we're going to put you in jail. And if you disagree with us, we are going to financially come against you and take everything you have. Well, you're out. You're in for a world of hurt. And I think that's the problem. And that's really where I wanted to steer that, is what happens after you devalue a human being. Things typically get people typically get put into groups, and you lose the autonomy of a human being.
Did you ever have that happen in school, where you were unceremoniously, without any room for appeal, lumped into a group, for better or for worse?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have that happen?
Oh, man. Think about being in sports, huh?
Dude, that's the
That
worst.
is one of the worst, isn't it?
So Yeah, it's a good point,
automatically
Josh.
And so
bully
then I wanted to.
or dumb.
Oh my goodness! But then I wanted to approach, now that we've defined what happens after we devalue the human being, and we understand that people get put into groups. What happens to the work ethic? Well, you're told not to strive for anything. There's no point in striving for anything because you're only as good as your group is.
And that's the key right there. That's the key.
And so
80-20.
so you don't want to strive to be in fact, we see this in America. This is a very popular sentiment in America that's risen up in business, is that they tell you to go, when you go to your 9-to-5 job, it's just a 9-to-5 job. Don't put any extra work into it because they don't care about you.
Act your wage.
Act your
wage, they say.
Act your wage. And so they're trying to put you in a box. And I mean, there's no incentive. Let me put it this way: there is no incentive if you have no value to work harder, because what are you working harder for?
If I could tie in very quickly with that, because those are excellent points that Josh has just made. When you talk about Marxism, and you talk about the taking of property, when you talk about the taking of
Get closer to the mic, please.
oh, sorry, when you talk about the taking of rights and things like that, what Josh just said is exactly right. The very first thing that gets done is, as an individual, you ask, why should I bother?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to make a difference. I have to tell you, I have tremendous respect for the Chinese people, because the thing is, I have to wonder if they think about that almost every day. What does it matter? And that would be a very depressing line of thought.
And it's extremely depressing, and that's why I get perplexed. Mind you, I see what certain people in America are trying to say with introducing some of these socialist ideas, but by and large, when you see how socialism gets played out over time, or I don't even want to say social, I'm going to take it to what's happening in China with communism. That's what happens. That's the type of government regulation that happens. They don't see you as individuals. They see you as a group of people, and what ends up happening is you get a social credit score. Mm-hmm. And that's what's happening in China. People are valued not based upon who they are as individuals, but how they perform in the collective group.
Because you're human capital.
Yes.
And that's what it really boils down to, is being human capital.
And that's what a lot of groups are trying to do now here in the States, especially like all of the squeaky wheel people. They're out there trying to place you in a certain group, whether you're
just a cis man, so I don't have to listen to you.
Trans person, whether you're a cis person, you're non, whether you're bi, whether you're whether you're that.
No. Oh, can I give you a good one? What governmental regulations do we see develop as a result? And mind you, this question wasn't posed directly it's posed in relation to China, but we're really just trying to answer this question for the listeners in general, right? In America, what you see is student loan forgiveness. Because you collectively as a group of people who have decided to go to college, you need these regulations, and we're going to take the money from the everyday taxpayer and from you, by the way, which is not you're not getting a free
lunch.
You're not getting a free lunch. They're paying for it somehow. But that's the thing, though. You see measures like this when there's no we don't have the money, but we got to help this group out. Or you see ideas, it was mentioned earlier, the idea of reparations, because it's no longer about the individual. Because these individuals who mind you, I imagine there's probably certain people who were lived in America at a time in which they were facing severe racial discrimination, and I'm talking about to the point to where it was ingrained into the law. But if we're going back to chattel slavery, there's not a single individual that exists in America today that was alive during chattel slavery. So why is there 20-year-olds and 19-year-olds who are talking about reparations? That makes no sense to me. but it does make sense to them, and it makes sense if you think about people as being a group and saying, oh, I am black and I am a part of this monolithic group, so therefore I need to benefit from this group. It's weird. You get some very weird policies, and I think the dangers in this, because you some people might say, well, what's the harm in all those things? What's the harm in forgiving the student loans? And what's the harm in doing reparations? Here's the harm. None of them are pragmatic.
Well, what's funny, I don't remember who it is. It might be Robin DiAngelo. I forget which one of the woke nut jobs it was who's been pushing this whole reparations bit. Just came out that one of them was descendant from the Mayflower and had parents who owned slaves. So I would just suggest...
I'm going to jump into politics here and answer a part of what Josh was talking about, the reason why they're doing this. Votes.
Yeah.
It all comes down for political purposes.
Yep.
Period. That's all it's about. If I can give reparations to how many millions of people across the United States,
I can buy people's votes with their own money.
their votes with all of their own money, plus all of these college students, I can buy their votes, especially the ones that have useless degrees.
Like art.
But I really want to expound on that point of, like, it's not pragmatic. Listen, when you start to think about people as groups and you approach that from an economics perspective, or that's not an economics perspective, you approach it economically and you look at it from the economic lens, you start doing really stupid things that make absolutely no sense for where you're currently at. And
One child policy.
and you don't really read the room. Like China's implementing a one child policy, but they're losing people faster than they're gaining people. So you're putting yourself in the long run at losing your stability as a economic powerhouse.
Interesting you bringing that up, because I just saw an article today. President Xi, he's got some major issues to deal with, and guess what one is near the top of his list?
Yep.
Overpopulation.
So I don't have the source in front of me here, and pull one up for me and we'll put it in the description here. Right, producer guy. They are now giving, type this in, 30 days of couple leave to have babies in China. They're now giving couples 30 days of couples leave to have babies. They're paying people to have children ultimately. And they have to pay them to do this because they've built decades of culture in a one-child policy, and people are like, no. I came from a one-child home.
How would you like to be a Christian in China having to make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
Well, but with the understanding, your child is very likely going to face persecution.
And that getting together, giving these couples off to have children is kind of an complete opposite of what the WEF wants, which is to reduce world population.
Yes.
Completely opposite. Complete 180, where they're wanting to reduce the world population by, what is it, 300 billion?
At least.
Something?
Really, where they want to bring it down is to 300 million. They want to bring down the world population to 300 million. 500 million. That's roundabouts where they want to reduce it to. And yeah, Dan's over there like, why? That's sick. Well, it's because they want
Power.
Exactly.
Less people, more control.
Exactly.
Exactly.
All about power. And
Very
money.
post-millennial of them. No joke.
So I want to go around the room real quick, just your short wrapping up thoughts, because we are over time. I do want to get everyone's wrapping up thoughts for the day. Mr. Charlie, cultural critique of the CCP from the chair of theology. Where does that leave us? What should the Christian have to say about that? And I want to go from this from an American standpoint, because the majority of our listeners are American. What do we see happening in China? And theologically, what should our response be to that?
There is a reason why there is a constant hammering of human rights on the Chinese government. That's number one. And take a look at why. Just do a little bit of study and you'll see it. But number two, there's probably not a government in existence today that is more openly anti-Christian with power than the Chinese government. You could make a case for a few of them in the Middle East, duly noted. But when you talk about a country that exudes the economic power and the political power, China's probably at the top.
Yep.
Pretty close, if not there.
Yep.
So moving over to the chair philosophy, Clint, final thoughts for the day from the chair philosophy. When we start to see the theology break down and we have that different value of the human made in the image of God. Final thoughts for the day.
When we remove God from our lives, we replace it with another one. No matter how much you try, there's always going to be a God reigning over you. It's either going to be the living God or any God you put in replacement of it. So the moment you take human life out, you put it in as another God, and it's usually $.
Wow. Absolutely correct and apropos for the subject. Culture. Mr. Steve?
Yes. You ever go visiting in China? Make sure you toe the line with the laws, especially as a Christian. Your chances of being thrown into prison as a prisoner of conscience will probably be highly rated.
You mean I can't bring my weed and have lesbian sex?
I was just
I mean,
thinking
sorry.
Why would you? Y'all some terrible people
But you
for
know
thinking
what?
all these things.
Brittany Griner's experience would have been a vacation compared to what would happen in China.
I agree.
I completely agree.
Totally agree.
She would probably have been given a death sentence, and somebody probably would have gotten
And
her
she would have been
organs.
tortured day in, day out.
Yes,
Absolutely.
and not in a pleasant way either.
Correct.
I see what you did there. And we're going to move on over to Josh. Josh, final thoughts for the day from the Chair of Economics, sir.
Money.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta give me some. Do you know what that song is? That's Pink Floyd. Money.
Yes.
Floyd.
Oh my gosh.
That whole song, by the way, funny enough, that song is
There's some
about
good
a
guitar in that.
very good
too.
song. But that song is also about corporate greed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes.
And so that's all bleeding into governmental greed. That's what we see with China. They abusing. Because the thing we have to acknowledge about China is the fact that they are a humongous economic powerhouse
Absolutely.
in the current state of affairs in the world.
On the backs of their own people.
On the backs of their own people.
Right.
And they sit in a very comfortable position, quite frankly, economically. But unfortunately, it's with the worst possible
Outcome.
worst possible means to achieve that
Amen.
outcome. And man, I just feel so bad for the people in China.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom. And if you want to join a cause, I'm sorry, the baby seals, I mean, I'm sure they're being clubbed mercilessly, but I'm more worried about the Uyghurs and the other minorities.
Falun Gong.
The
Falun
people
Gong.
that have souls.
People who have souls. I'm more worried about them than I am about the baby seals or the tortoises or the dogs that
Spotted
don't
owl.
get properly. Exactly. Just insert your random issue there, or about reparations. I'm sorry, guys. There are people who are enslaved today, and do not give me this bull crap about racist white people owning slaves. If you have ever bought a watch, bought a shirt from Walmart, Target, Nike, Apple,
Kmart.
Microsoft, if you've ever patronized one of those, you have benefited from slave labor. We all do. And it is an ugly, ugly evil. And instead of messing around with it here with all these other dumb, frivolous things in the United States, we should be focused on the real issues of this world. And they all ultimately will lead to a need for Christ. And that should be our first and foremost mission. Second, beyond the soul are the people who are actually hurting. Actually hurting. I'm not talking about your hidden trauma from, look, we all have our trauma. I'm talking about people who are actually being killed for their faith or for their organs, just the most grotesque, vile stuff that you can imagine. Maybe we should focus on those things instead of wasting our efforts on nonsense. Just my 2 cents. With that said, if you like this podcast, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We love you so much. Thank you for over 170,000 downloads of the audio. Thank you. Thank you. We are honored. It's a privilege to speak to you every week. It is something that we do take seriously. And YouTube, we see what you're doing. And thank you for letting us know that we're annoying to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're making a difference.
Anytime I see those contexts pop up, I'm like, oh, boy.
I know.
And don't forget, I keep an eye on it, and they are constantly swiping.
Always.
Just like they do with China Uncensored.
Like, they don't even understand, like, they don't even grasp that whenever they say, what you should like with abortion on one of our contexts, that you should consult your medical professional. I'm like, you guys just don't get it. You guys...
They don't watch the videos. They just look for keywords.
Like, we're saying that abortion should not happen, period. It's bad.
Come on, man.
Exactly. So, with that said,
follow us on Twitter.
Thank you all that we are on the Twitter. We're our resident twit is taking care of the Twitter, and that is the twits squared, both Clint and myself. So you will see comments from us out there. So just Rumble. We have over 60 subscribers on Rumble. We cannot forget about
Rumbling and tumbling.
Thank you for being there. You guys are awesome. Rumble along. And with that, we love you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
It's not over.
All right. If you are still here, we put you to sleep, or you are our super listener, I want to go around the room and ask, what is the one thing about Chinese culture that sticks out? This is random. This could be negative. This can be positive. This can be a little bit spicy for YouTube. What's the one thing that sticks out?
Great question. The Christian community there. And by the way, I believe in end times, you may see a movement come out of the most unlikely of places, and guess where it would be?
North Korea.
China.
Oh, China. Same diff. Clint.
It's gonna have to be the school bar. It's a ramen bar where you go in and they lock you inside this building until you're done with your schoolwork, and you have to prove to the chef that you're done with the schoolwork, and then they get you out.
Take 2.
Oh my gosh.
Education system.
Oh my gosh. Steve.
They got nap time.
I would probably say the way they run their prisons, that one of the things that has always bothered me, and I've watched a lot of stuff, read a lot of stuff on their, like we've talked about, prisoners of conscience, and I was listening to this stuff on the Falun Gong, and it just
hurts the heart.
It does, and you hear about so many people that go into prison and their families never see them again because they spoke out against something, and that's all it was. And they never find them. They never see them again, ever. They can't find them in prison. They just disappear.
Well, they're, in all likelihood, they are an organ harvesting candidate.
Exactly.
Their entrails have been left on the side of a ditch somewhere, something like that. Josh?
I think 2 things. First, I thought you were going to say, what's your favorite Chinese food restaurant? I was like, no, that's too soon. But 2 things that do stick out to me. First and foremost, they're extremely smart. Extremely smart.
Discipline.
Extremely disciplined. It's just unfortunate that the government doesn't allow them to succeed at a high, because the problem is when you do succeed at a high level, the government just comes in and takes it, and then you know what's funny? You'll lie about it for them. Like that guy with Alibaba, for the longest time, he said that he wasn't involved with the Chinese government. Lo and behold, comes out later. Oh, he has ties to the Chinese government.
Yeah.
And Alibaba like rivals Amazon and how big it is. Like, that's incredible. So they're extremely smart, and also I do like the culinary, the food. The food is really exceptional.
I like the Americanized food. I don't know if I would.
Well, the
eat
guy
over
Panda
there.
Express, they came from China. They're immigrants from China.
Yeah, I'll tell
Yeah.
you right now, Panda Express is not like China food. I'll tell you that
It's
right
Americanized.
But it's not. It's not. But the people who made Panda Express are from China.
Good Chinese food, real Chinese food.
It has
is
a grandma's house.
good stuff, man.
What I would say is, I was talking to someone earlier today. I think the Chinese, I trust them in two things: killing people and making things that kill people. So if you ever are in the market for a good AK pattern rifle or an SKS,
Oh, yeah.
those are the most reliable guns you will ever own. I was talking about how much I love my MAK 90. It was a assault weapons band of the 90s AK, and they ask you how would you run your AK? It's like full mag pull, no wood, lasers and lights, please.
Full
Absolutely annoy the AK
best,
purists.
You're right. The best ones that are made come out of China.
Yep, China or Russia. So
And they
Explosive
are
helmets.
it's
man,
amazing that you can
excellent
trust
guns.
them. You can trust them in two things:
And they're
killing
good
people
at-
and making things that kill
And
people.
they're good at backwards engineering, like alien vessels and stuff,
He's put on the hat. He's got two hats on.
All right.
Yeah.
With that said, God help us. We love you all. Bye bye. Have a nice week.
It's easy.
Right there.